Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. It's Clara here. I am so deeply grateful you've chosen to spend your evening with me. Before we unravel tonight's incredibly chilling account, please take a brief moment to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and give this video a thumbs up. It truly helps our community grow. And as always, let me know down in the comments section which city or country you are listening from tonight. I love seeing just how far these voices travel into the dark. Tonight's story begins with an unexpected sound. A landline phone ringing in a house that usually knew only silence. Imagine living in your dream home for over a decade and a half. It's the place where you feel entirely safe, entirely at peace. Then a voice from the past calls you out of nowhere. A voice that trembles with pure, unadulterated terror. He says, "Ma'am, you bought my grandfather's estate 15 years ago. There is a hidden crawlspace beneath the pantry floorboards. Promise me on your life, you will never look inside." I gave him my word. I swore I wouldn't. But exactly 4 weeks later, driven by an unease I couldn't shake, I pried those boards open anyway. What lay beneath changed my life forever. $32 million in pristine vacuum-sealed currency, and a handwritten warning that made my blood run cold. My name is Evelyn Vance. I am 64 years old, a retired botanical archivist, and I have been a widow for nearly 7 years. My home is a beautiful isolated Victorian property located at the dead end of Blackwood Lane, in a small Sleepy Valley town in Pennsylvania. It features faded blue siding, an expansive wraparound porch, and ancient oak trees that guard the perimeter. It was the exact haven I had envisioned living in since I was a young girl. I purchased the property back in 2011 from a deeply eccentric couple named the Garrisons. They were in a desperate rush to sell, practically giving the house away before fleeing across the country to the Pacific Northwest without offering a single word of explanation. At the time I didn't question it. People flee bad memories or bad debts every day. Life moves on. For 15 years the estate was a sanctuary. I raised my son Julian within those walls. I watched him grow, move off to the city for his residency, and eventually start a beautiful family of his own just 3 districts away. The basement of the house was entirely ordinary. Just cold limestone walls, a humming water heater, shelves of homemade preserves, and boxes of holiday decorations. But there was one specific architectural anomaly. Underneath the deep walk-in pantry in the kitchen, there was a hatch-like section of floorboards that had been heavily secured with a massive industrial-grade iron deadbolt. I had never been given a key to it. When I had a local handyman look at it years ago, he simply shrugged it off, claiming old Victorian homes frequently had sealed coal chutes or decommissioned fruit cellars. So I placed a heavy braided rug over it, forgot it existed, and went about my life. Until a stormy Tuesday evening in late April. I was standing at the sink washing the dinner dishes when the old kitchen landline, a number I kept strictly for emergencies, began to ring. The caller ID displayed an unknown out-of-state number from New Mexico. I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" A long silence stretched over the line. I could hear heavy, jagged breathing. Finally, a fractured voice spoke. "Hello, ma'am. Please don't hang up. My name is Arthur Garrison. I believe you purchased my grandparents' estate on Blackwood Lane roughly 15 years ago." A sudden, inexplicable chill swept through the kitchen. "Yes," I replied slowly, my grip tightening on the receiver. "That's correct. Is there something wrong?" "There is a sealed space beneath the pantry," Arthur whispered, his voice cracking with an intensity that made the hairs on my arm stand straight up. "A locked crawlspace. I need you to make a solemn vow to me right now. For your own survival, for the safety of anyone in that house. Promise me you will never ever open it. Leave it in the dark." I let out a forced, uneasy chuckle. It was the kind of nervous defense mechanism you employ when you think someone is playing an elaborate prank on you. "Mr. Garrison, that is an incredibly bizarre request to make to a stranger after 15 years. "I don't care how it sounds," he snapped, his voice dropping into a desperate, panicked hiss. "Just swear it to me. Please." He didn't sound crazy. He sounded hunted. "All right," I said, entirely focused on ending the unsettling interaction. "Promise." He muttered a frantic, breathless thank you and severed the connection before I could ask a single follow-up question. I stood frozen in the dim light of the kitchen, holding the dead receiver to my ear, listening to the hollow dial tone as the rain lashed against the windowpane. I tried to rationalize it. I told myself old families simply have embarrassing skeletons they want buried forever. But over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in the house shifted entirely. The light fixture directly above the pantry began to flicker erratically. Worse still, my golden retriever Silas, who usually slept at my feet while I cooked, completely refused to step foot into the kitchen. He would stand at the threshold, whimpering, his ears pinned back, staring intently at the rug covering the sealed floorboards. Driven by growing anxiety, I began doing some quiet digital digging into the Garrison family history. What I unearthed in the old digitized archives of the local newspaper made my stomach drop. The grandfather, log magnate Thomas Garrison, hadn't just run a successful lumber mill in the 1990s. He had been embroiled in a massive, high-profile federal corruption probe, involving embezzled state funds and union racketeering. A week before the federal grand jury was set to hand down an indictment, two of the state's star witnesses, accountants who worked directly under Thomas, vanished without a trace. The case went entirely cold, and the Garrison family vanished from Pennsylvania shortly after. Why was Arthur Garrison calling me now? What had changed after a decade and a half of absolute silence? Exactly 1 month after that phone call, on a suffocatingly quiet afternoon, I found myself standing in my kitchen. Julian had taken my grandchildren out for a day at the lake, leaving me entirely isolated. In my right hand, I held a heavy-duty crowbar from the garage. In my left, a high-powered tactical flashlight. My heart was thumping like a trapped bird against my ribs. I knelt down, dragged the heavy braided rug away, and forced the crowbar deep into the seam of the ancient iron deadbolt. With a sickening, splintering screech of wood and metal, the lock gave way. The heavy wooden hatch groaned open on rusted hinges, releasing a blast of stagnant, freezing air into the warm kitchen. I clicked on the flashlight and swept the brilliant white beam down into the dark, cavernous space below. My breath caught in my throat. Stacked neatly against the reinforced concrete walls were dozens of heavy, military-grade waterproof cases. I climbed down the small wooden ladder and popped the latches on the nearest container. Inside, wrapped in thick industrial vacuum seals, were hundreds of tightly bound bricks of $100 bills. A sea of illicit wealth hidden right beneath my feet. And right there, resting squarely on top of the millions, was a single pristine white envelope. Written across the front in elegant, faded cursive was my name, Evelyn Vance. I stared at the fortune, my hands trembling violently as I reached for the envelope. Who had put my name on a note hidden decades ago? And more importantly, if the man who called me was desperate to keep this dark secret buried, who was the shadow currently watching my kitchen window from the edge of the woods? Stay tuned for part 2, because the true nightmare was only just beginning. Welcome back to part 2. Let's plunge straight back into Evelyn's unfolding nightmare. I did not touch a single bill that afternoon. I want to make that explicitly clear because in the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of the monsters who were hunting this fortune, that single boundary line mattered immensely. I stood paralyzed in that subterranean concrete tomb for what felt like an eternity, my flashlight beam dancing erratically over the millions of dollars. The fragile vow I had spoken to Arthur Garrison was shattered into 1,000 pieces, along with whatever illusion of safety I had enjoyed for the last 15 years. Shaking violently, I climbed back up the ladder into the blinding light of my kitchen, pulled the heavy wooden hatch shut, and dragged the braided rug back over the fractured wood. I sat at my wooden dining table, staring blindly at the white envelope resting in my lap. I poured myself a cup of tea that grew entirely cold, untouched, as the afternoon sun dipped below the horizon and plunged the room into darkness. I was terrified of what was written inside that envelope. $32 million. I had done a rudimentary mental calculation based on the sheer volume of the military cases. That kind of money wasn't a forgotten family inheritance. It wasn't the secret stash of an eccentric millionaire. Money hidden with that level of extreme paranoia, accompanied by a warning from a terrified descendant 15 years later, was blood money. It was currency that carried a body count. I am a retired archivist living on a very modest, fixed pension that barely covers the rising property taxes on this old Victorian estate. My son Julian was drowning in medical school debt while trying to provide for his young children. $32 million could instantly wipe away every burden my family would ever face for generations. The temptation was a living, breathing entity in the room with me. I won't pretend I didn't think about keeping quiet. I won't pretend I didn't imagine taking just one small bundle, telling absolutely no one, and quietly solving our problems. But every time I looked toward the kitchen pantry, Arthur Garrison's panicked voice echoed in my skull. Leave it in the dark. For your own survival. If that fortune had sat undisturbed for over 20 years, it meant the people who owned it were waiting for the storm to clear. It wasn't a windfall. It was hazardous waste. If I spent even a single dollar, I would permanently tie my soul to whatever horrific crime generated that cash. With trembling fingers, I finally tore open the envelope at midnight. The handwriting inside was formal, precise, and chillingly cold. Evelyn, if your eyes are reading these words, then curiosity has overridden your survival instinct. I am deeply sorry. This wealth is not a miracle. It is the physical manifestation of my father's sins. Money built on extortion, unrecorded, untaxed, and dripping in blood. Innocent people were permanently silenced to protect this vault. If you choose to contact the authorities, you will possess the courage I always lacked. If you choose to keep it, know this. The wolves will eventually realize the shepherd is gone, and they will come to reclaim what is theirs. They will not ask nicely. Your countdown has begun. AG. I read the terrifying missive 4 times until the words burned into my retinas. My phone line was no longer safe. My home was no longer a sanctuary. I dialed Julian's personal number, my voice cracking as I confessed everything. The warning call, the cracked floorboards, the stacks of cash, and the sinister note. A heavy, suffocating silence stretched across the line from my son's end. When he finally spoke, his tone was dead serious. Mom, listen to me very carefully. Do not touch anything. Do not call the local police department yet. Half the old guard in that valley town used to play poker with the Garrisons. Tomorrow morning you call an elite attorney out of Philadelphia. We need a legal shield before we do anything else. He was entirely right. The fear radiating through me grew sharper, but beneath the panic, a cold sense of fierce resolve began to take root. I hadn't sought out this horror. I hadn't gone looking for blood money, but it had been festering beneath my kitchen floor for 15 years, and I refused to spend the remaining years of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for the shadows to come knocking. The following morning, I contacted a highly discreet, semi-retired federal compliance attorney named Marcus Vance, no relation to me, who specialized in high-stakes asset forfeiture and protected whistleblowers. I drove out to his high-security office in the city, carrying a flash drive loaded with digital photographs I had taken of the crawl space, the cash, and the handwritten note. Marcus listened to my account without interrupting once. He reviewed the photographs, his jaw tightening as he examined the serial numbers visible on the vacuum-sealed bills. Mrs. Vance, Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair, his expression incredibly grave. You have handled this flawlessly so far by keeping your hands off that currency. But we are in a race against time. This money is almost certainly connected to the 1998 federal racketeering case against Thomas Garrison. If the serial numbers match the missing state treasury funds from that era, you are sitting on an active volcano. We need to bypass local law enforcement entirely and bring this directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He explained that he would draft an ironclad, formal disclosure detailing my discovery as a property owner acting in perfect good faith, ensuring full civil asset protection. I left his office that afternoon feeling a massive weight lift from my shoulders. We had a professional strategy. Marcus was scheduled to contact the FBI's regional field office the very next morning. But the universe had other plans. 2 days later, my neighbor from down the valley road, a sweet elderly woman named Martha, called me to chat. Near the end of the conversation, she mentioned something that made my heart stop. Oh, by the way, Evelyn, a very polite gentleman in a dark charcoal-tailored suit stopped by my porch yesterday afternoon. He claimed he was a historical surveyor researching the old historic properties on Blackwood Lane. He asked how long you lived alone, whether you spent much time in the basement, and if you had made any major renovations to the kitchen lately. I told him you mostly kept to yourself. He was driving a massive black SUV with heavily tinted, out-of-state plates. Did you hire a contractor, dear? The wolves weren't coming eventually. They were already walking the perimeter of my property. Who was the sophisticated stranger inquiring about my kitchen renovations? And what happens when the federal government realizes exactly what else is hidden inside those walls? Don't move a muscle. Part 3 is next. Welcome back to Part 3. The tension is reaching a boiling point. Let's see how Evelyn navigates the tightening trap. A sickening wave of icy dread washed over me as I thanked Martha and hung up the phone. I immediately contacted Marcus, my voice frantic. The legal strategy had to accelerate. The anonymous handlers of this blood money weren't just monitoring the house from afar anymore. They were actively interviewing my neighbors, assessing my daily routines, and closing in on the vault. They know the clock is ticking, Marcus told me, his voice sharp with professional urgency. I am moving our federal appointment to tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Evelyn, double lock every entrance to your home tonight. Do not leave the property, do not approach the crawl space, and keep your phone in your hand at all times. I spent that entire night sitting in the dark of my living room, clutching a heavy iron fireplace poker, while my dog Silas sat pressed against my shins, growling low in his throat at every passing gust of wind. I felt like a prisoner in my own skin. The $32 million resting beneath my kitchen felt like a literal homing beacon, drawing pure evil straight to my doorstep. The next morning, Marcus and I sat in a sleek, sterile briefing room inside the federal building in downtown Philadelphia. We were met by two seasoned federal investigators, Special Agent Sarah Vance, a strange coincidence of names, and Agent David Torres. Both possessed the unblinking, analytical gaze of individuals who had spent decades staring down dangerous cartel leaders and white-collar monsters. Marcus laid out the comprehensive timeline, the digital photographs, the handwritten note, and the details of the suspicious historical surveyor in the black SUV. Agent Vance examined the photographs of the military cases, her expression hardening with every passing second. She looked up at me, her eyes drilling into mine. Mrs. Vance, we have kept an active, classified file on the Thomas Garrison organization open since 1999. It was never archived. It was simply stalled due to a complete lack of physical evidence. Those specific military cases match a missing shipment of high-security containers stolen from a Federal Reserve transport over 2 decades ago. And those 2 witnesses who vanished? They didn't just disappear. We always suspected they were forced to hide the hoard before being eliminated. The room became entirely airless. The stakes had instantly magnified from an illicit cache of money into a horrific, unresolved federal double homicide investigation. We are going to take immediate control of the property, Mrs. Vance, Agent Torres stated firmly. For your personal safety, we are deploying a covert tactical recovery team to extract that currency under the guise of an environmental safety team. It is absolutely vital that you do not return to that crawl space under any circumstances. By Monday morning, a fleet of unmarked white vans arrived at my estate. The agents wore casual utilities, looking exactly like private residential contractors to any observing eyes. They spent 48 hours straight inside my home, systematically cataloging every single brick of currency, dusting the concrete vault for microscopic forensic traces, and deploying specialized ground-penetrating radar across the entire basement floorboards. While the intensive federal sweep was actively underway, Marcus formalized my protected whistleblower status. But the criminal syndicate behind the money wasn't about to let $32 million vanish into federal custody without a fight. On Thursday evening, while I was staying at a secure, undisclosed hotel near Julian's residence, my personal cell phone buzzed. The caller ID was entirely masked. Assuming it was Marcus with an update, I answered. Hello? A completely unfamiliar voice responded. It was an older, raspy, terrifyingly calm tone that carried the chilling authority of a psychopath. Evelyn Vance, the man said, pronouncing my name with a slow, sickening deliberation. You have made an extraordinarily uneducated mistake. You have invited the government into a house that does not belong to you. Those cases belong to individuals who possess a very long memory and an infinite amount of patience. My breath hitched. I immediately tapped the record button on my device, just as Marcus had instructed me to do. The money is gone, I said, trying to force a strength into my voice that I didn't possess. The FBI has already processed the vault. It's completely out of my hands. The voice let out a soft, mocking laugh that sent a cold spike straight down my spine. Nothing is ever truly out of your hands, Evelyn. Everything can be rewritten. You have a beautiful son named Julian. He works the late shift residency at the medical center, doesn't he? And those gorgeous twin grandchildren who walk to the elementary school park every afternoon? It would be a catastrophic tragedy if the immense stress of this federal situation caused an irreparable accident to occur to your family. You will contact the investigators tomorrow. You will tell them it was an elaborate hallucination, a mistake, or you will suffer the ultimate asset forfeiture. The line went completely dead. My family had just been directly threatened with execution by a ghost. Would you crumble under the weight of that terror and flee? Or would you stand your ground against a multi-million-dollar criminal syndicate? Keep listening because in Part 4 the face of the monster finally steps into the light. Welcome back to Part 4. The psychological warfare has turned deadly. Evelyn is about to make a choice that will define the rest of her days. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, my hands shaking so violently that the cell phone slipped from my grip and clattered against the hardwood floor. Pure, visceral panic threatened to swallow my mind whole. They knew where Julian worked. They knew my grandchildren's daily schedules. For one agonizing hour, curled into a ball in that sterile hotel room, I wanted to completely surrender. I wanted to call Agent Vance, recant my entire story, pack a single suitcase, and flee to a country where nobody knew my name. But the following morning, as I sat at the small breakfast table watching my grandchildren laugh as they ate their cereal, completely oblivious to the shadow hanging over their young lives, a fierce, protective maternal rage completely replaced my fear. These monsters had hidden their blood money under my floorboards for 15 years. They had turned my dream home into a crime scene, and now they were threatening the lives of my flesh and blood to protect their stolen empire. They expected a 64-year-old retired archivist's widow to fold like a house of cards. They were dead wrong. I immediately delivered the audio recording of the death threat to Agent Vance and Agent Torres. Within 6 hours, federal forensic cyber units traced the burner device. While the call had been heavily routed through encrypted digital proxies, the initial cell tower ping originated from a high-end luxury retirement community in Scottsdale, Arizona. The digital footprint matched the daily travel expenditures of a man named Victor Vance, no relation to me, but a man named Harlan Greer. Harlan Greer was the 76-year-old former chief financial officer of Thomas Garrison's old logging empire. He was the brilliant, invisible architect who had laundered millions through shell corporations in the late 90s before completely vanishing from the federal radar before the indictments fell. He was still alive, living like royalty on laundered assets, and he was the one pulling the strings. This threat is the absolute nail in their coffin, Agent Torres told me, his eyes blazing with professional satisfaction. Harlan Greer just committed an explicit federal felony of witness intimidation on a recorded line. This gives us the legal leverage to execute sweeping, immediate warrants on every single one of his active banking channels and real estate holdings across the country. 3 weeks later, Marcus contacted me with a stunning development. The Department of Justice had leveled a massive multi-count indictment against Harlan Greer and Thomas Garrison's surviving son, Julian Garrison, coincidentally sharing my son's name. Let's call him Gregory Garrison. You don't have to do this, Evelyn, Marcus reminded me gently. The recorded audio is incredibly strong evidence on its own. I looked Marcus dead in the eye. I will be in that courtroom. I want them to look into the eyes of the woman they thought they could terrorize. The morning of the federal hearing was suffocatingly tense. The courthouse was a grand, intimidating fortress of marble and granite. I sat in the front row of the gallery, flanked by 2 armed federal marshals. When the side doors opened, federal bailiffs escorted the defendants into the room. Harlan Greer looked exactly like a sophisticated, wealthy serpent. He wore a pristine, bespoke Italian suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression radiating absolute, arrogant confidence. Sitting beside him was Gregory Garrison, a man in his late 50s whose eyes darted around the room with visible anxiety. When my name was called over the courtroom loudspeaker, a wave of profound stillness washed over me. I walked down the center aisle, stepped up to the wooden witness box, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the absolute truth. I recounted every single detail with absolute clarity. The initial cryptic warning call, the physical discovery of the $32 million, and the chilling words written in the note. Then, the prosecutor played the audio recording of the phone threat through the high-powered courtroom speakers. Hearing that raspy, murderous voice echo through the cavernous courtroom made my skin crawl, but I kept my gaze locked directly onto Harlan Greer. For the first time, his arrogant facade cracked. His jaw tightened, and his expensive legal team began frantically whispering among themselves. The defense attorney stepped up to cross-examine me, attempting to paint me as an unstable, greedy homeowner who was exaggerating a routine property dispute to secure a financial reward from the government. "Mrs. Vance," the young defense lawyer sneered, leaning against the podium, "is it not true that you are simply fabricating this narrative of terror, because you are aware that under federal finder statutes, you could potentially claim a massive percentage of this seized currency?" The defense was trying to turn the narrative against me, painting me as a fraudulent, money-hungry criminal in front of a federal judge. How would I respond to this vicious character assassination? The grand finale of this incredible journey is up next in Part 5. Do not miss it. Welcome back to the fifth and final part of tonight's incredible story. Let's witness the stunning resolution of Evelyn Vance's Stand Against the Dark. I looked directly at the defense attorney, refusing to let him see even a flicker of intimidation in my eyes. I leaned into the microphone, my voice completely calm, steady and resonant. "Sir," I said with absolute conviction, "I spent 35 years of my life as a botanical archivist. My job was to preserve history, to separate truth from decay. I didn't ask for $32 million to be hidden beneath my kitchen pantry. I didn't ask for a grandfather's sins to bleed into my home. I went to the federal authorities because I refused to let blood money dictate the safety of my son and my grandchildren. I don't care about a single dollar of that fortune. I care about the truth. And the truth is, your client threatened to murder my family." A heavy silence descended upon the courtroom. The federal magistrate looked down over his spectacles at the defense team, thoroughly unimpressed by their tactics. When the magistrate handed down his preliminary rulings, it was a total victory for justice. Based on the overwhelming physical evidence of the seized currency, the forensic pings, and the undisputed audio recording of the witness intimidation, Harlan Greer and Gregory Garrison were denied bail entirely, remanded into immediate federal custody pending a full criminal trial. The house of cards that the Garrison organization had spent over 25 years carefully building had completely collapsed in less than a month because they underestimated the moral backbone of a mother. The comprehensive federal trial took place roughly a year later. It was a long, arduous process, but the outcome was absolute. Harlan Greer was convicted on multiple counts of federal racketeering, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and extortion. Given his advanced age of 76, the consecutive sentences handed down by the federal judge ensured that he would spend the remainder of his natural life behind a concrete wall. A fitting vault for a man who loved prisons of secrecy. Gregory Garrison accepted a comprehensive plea agreement, exposing the entire remaining network of their offshore shell accounts in exchange for a 15-year sentence. But the story doesn't end there. Remember how the defense attorney accused me of searching for a payday? I truly hadn't given a single thought to the financial aspect of the asset forfeiture. I was simply focused on survival. But Marcus Vance, my brilliant attorney, had been working tirelessly behind the scenes from day one. Because the $32 million was officially categorized as abandoned, illicit property with absolutely no surviving legitimate claimants or victims left alive from the original 1998 logging fraud, the federal court applied the maximum allowance under the Civil Asset Forfeiture Reform Act. In recognition of my extraordinary bravery, my immediate good faith reporting, and my total cooperation in breaking a 20-year-old federal cold case, the United States government officially awarded me a finder's fee percentage, just over $2.4 million after all state and federal taxes were fully settled. It wasn't $32 million. It was never meant to be. But that $2.4 million was entirely clean, entirely legal, and carried absolutely none of the horrific trauma or blood attached to the fortune that had rested in my darkness. That windfall completely transformed my life, not through hollow luxury, but through the profound gift of total peace of mind. I paid off the historic Victorian estate completely. The house didn't feel cold or haunted anymore. It felt fully, vibrantly mine. I established an ironclad educational trust for my beautiful grandchildren, helped Julian pay off every single cent of his medical residency debts, and safely invested the remainder so I would never have to worry about the future again. But my favorite part of this resolution was what I did with the crawlspace itself. I hired a brilliant local contractor to completely gut the concrete vault beneath the kitchen pantry. We tore out the cold limestone, installed beautiful radiant heated hardwood flooring, built custom recessed oak bookshelves, and placed a luxurious, comfortable reading chair with a warm gold lamp directly in the center of the space. It is now my absolute favorite room in the entire house. It is no longer a hidden monument to greed, fear, and murder. I took a space that had represented darkness for over 2 decades and turned it into a sanctuary of light, knowledge, and peace. Harlan Greer passed away in a federal medical prison facility 3 years into his sentence. Gregory Garrison remains incarcerated. I never received another anonymous call, and the black SUVs vanished from the Valley Road forever. Arthur Garrison, the terrified man who had called me on that stormy Tuesday evening to warn me, sent a brief handwritten letter to my attorney's office 2 years after the trial. It contained just 2 sentences. "Thank you, Evelyn. You possessed the immense courage that our family spent generations running away from. You finally set us free." I never replied to the letter. There was nothing left to say. I look out over my sun-drenched garden every afternoon now, watching the oaks sway in the Pennsylvania breeze, listening to the beautiful sound of my grandchildren playing on the porch. I didn't get $32 million. I got something infinitely more valuable. I got my life back, entirely untangled from a web of secrets that was never mine to keep. So I will leave you tonight with the exact same profound question that I had to answer on that fateful April afternoon. If you pulled back a rug in your home, opened a door, and found a fortune that didn't belong to you, would you have the courage to walk into the light, or would you let the darkness consume you? Thank you so much for listening tonight, my dear friends. Don't forget to subscribe, leave your beautiful thoughts in the comments below, and sleep safely tonight. Goodbye for now.